Swami would be horrified if he thought that we were making him special because he experienced this liberation, this moksha, because it's there for all of us. I was some years before he was visiting here. Well, Riemann was driving, Swami was in the passenger seat, I was in the back seat, and I think Jyotish and Devi were in the car as well. And Swami said something about the time would be coming of his passing. And I just reacted and said, "We're not ready." And he said, "I know, that's why I'm here." And at that moment, I just sort of, my heart sank. It was like, he had had so much physical suffering in the last 30 plus years of his life. You know, like 18 different ailments with his body. He was working out a lot of stuff, maybe for us too, I don't know, but I didn't want him to suffer any longer just because I wasn't ready. I better get ready, you know? That was my thought anyway. I tried to express it, but that wasn't the point. He was aware that he was helping us all learn how to do community, Sangha, Yogananda's work, his attunement with his work. And he knew when the time had come, would come, when he would be ready to go. He would sometimes tell us, and again, this was like in the last 10 years of his life, he would tell us a story that he said Yogananda used to tell about a young couple who had a baby, and then the wife died in childbirth. The baby lived, and so the husband was caring for the baby. They had been very devoted as a couple, and he continued to be very devoted to God. And one day, when the baby was still quite young, God said, "It's time for you to come. I'm calling you." And this young man thought, "Oh no, what's going to happen to my baby?" And yet he knew that if God called, he should go. And so he said, "Okay, God, but can you first show me that the baby is going to be okay and cared for?" And not unlike the story of Moses and a few others through history, he put the baby in a little basket, and then he hid behind a nearby bush. And then he saw at a certain point, this couple came over, saw the baby, the wife picked up the baby, was very tender with the baby. They realized nobody was caring for the baby, and so they took the baby home with them. And this young man was grateful to God that he was able to see everything was going to be fine and he could go. I mean, that's the ultimate responsibility, not only to our family or our child, but our baby, you know, an infant. It's huge. And he would tell that story, and I would always imagine that his baby, Kriyananda's, was Ananda, and that he was getting us ready to go, and that he would peek now and then to see if we were taking care of things in the way that God would. And, and then at the right moment, it was time to go. Yogananda said that death would be his final sacrifice to Swami. Spiritually, on this path, in these teachings, that's interpreted as final freedom in God. His freedom in God would come at death, not during life. But of course, there was a progression in his life. And those of us, we lived with him, near him, for 43 years, and I watched him become changed in the sense that he used to, as a young man, he was like a general, and he, spoke with great fortitude, and he was incredibly brilliant. And so, listening to him was wonderful. And then he wrote in music and all of those things. But later in life, and especially in the last 10 years or so, whenever he would speak and he would tell something about Yogananda, he would get so filled with joy that he couldn't speak. He called it, it was bliss, not just joy. It was expanded joy in bliss. And he just couldn't, the veil was lifted. He couldn't relate any longer only with the brilliance. It came to just loving and just bliss. And so he was in Assisi, Italy, where Ananda has a community and a temple that this is a copy of that temple that they have there, and a retreat center that is extremely popular in Europe. And he had a home there, a second home. He had a home on each continent. India, which wasn't, India, Italy, and America, Crystal Hermitage. But so he was in his home there in Italy when he passed on April 21st at 8 in the morning. But for us here, it was 11 p.m. the night before, April 20th. And I remember that vividly because I was still awake, and Devi called, and she said, "We just got a call, Swami stopped breathing, pray." And, hung up, and she was calling all the community leaders, and Riemann and I, of course, went to our meditation space and started praying, and then within a few minutes, we got a second call that he had left his body. And so it's always a little neck adjustment for me to think of it as April 21st, because for us it happened the night of April 20th, but that's neither here nor there. Swami wrote an essay once called The Final Exam, and he ended up publishing it in a book of essays called Religion in the New Age. And in this essay, The Final Exam, he talks about ways that we can help friends or loved ones as they're passing, as they're getting ready to leave their bodies. And he talks about a few key things. One of them was if you've had trouble with somebody in your life, try to reach them and mend the problem. share in harmony and in love with that person. If you're not able to reach them, then pray for them in that way. And if somebody has hurt you and you're carrying some pain, try to release it. And if you can, communicate with that person. If you can't, then do it in prayer. And I remember seeing that in action once. A friend of ours, who was the spiritual director in Ananda, Portland, years ago, she was quite young, I think in her late 40s maybe, and she got breast cancer. And she decided she didn't want to do chemo and things like that. And the breast cancer started taking her. It did take her. And when she was towards the end of her life, she was in California at the hospital near the community there. And she called friends and wanted to say goodbye. And I ended up hopping on a plane to go down and see her. And when I got there and we, exchanged some loving thoughts with each other, she was probably about 75 pounds at that point. And the next day she ended up passing, or in the night. So she was very, very close. And I watched her start to pick up the phone and call people that Swami hadn't written this essay yet, the final exam. It's not like it was prescribed anywhere, although she'd been raised as a devout Catholic, so she had it in her DNA. But in any case, she started calling people that she knew had trouble with her, or she had trouble with them. And she would just say, I just want you to know I love you. She called the ex-wife of her current husband and said, I just want you to know I love you. And this woman was just, what could you say? She was just in tears with letting go of those feelings of anguish and anger. And so anyway, that's what he was talking about in this essay. And I realized that Swami had been living this every day of his life. He didn't wait for the final exam to start working on the final exam. He was living the final exam every day in the way that he would always be relating in and from his center. Another quality that I admired so much is how transparent he was. He didn't hide anything. And whenever anything personal would happen to him, or something that, a personal decision that he had to make, he would start talking to us about it. Things I would never talk to people about, but he would start talking about it. And he would talk with smaller groups, and then he would bring it to the whole community, and he was just transparent. And that's when we become free of ego, we become transparent. And in order to become free of ego, we have to affirm transparency. And that was the point. And when you look at his writings, and I wanted to look for a moment at what Morley and Riemann just read, there were a lot of things in there. I mean, first of all, when he first emailed this to us, his will, I looked at it, I thought, how does he do it? How does he take an entire lifetime with gazillions of, people and communities and all the things, books and music, and come up with just these few key points. And he just nailed it. He just simplified it to those few key points. And most of it is very, very beautiful. And what I'm about to say is also, if we take it in the right way, but the quotes I have is, or the question of making the teachings available to the greatest possible number of people. And then the other one was, let their first consideration be not public opinion, nor individuals' needs construed. Well, anyway, the point was not public opinion. When you listen carefully to those two phrases, you realize that that had been the downfall of Judas, wasn't it? He thought Christ didn't understand how to get the Sanhedrin to, he wanted more people to be able to tune into Christ. He was sincere in that. It seemed like a good thing. But that thought of, I'm going to share this with everyone, when in fact Christ had a different approach to it. He was making disciples. He was going deep with 11 of his disciples. And his teaching, well, Yogananda said it's crucified daily, but it's still around. Let's just put it that way. So that consciousness, that thought, and I'm sensitive to that thought because when I worked in the publishing, we had to work really hard at getting his books out and getting his work out, but to do it always in the right spirit. When you start to pull on that thread without the spiritual considerations, that thread will unravel. And, we can have incarnations to try to mend it and repair it. So he's got a hint in here about what not to do. And then he's got a lot in here about what to do. Some of you know that I've been writing a book about little vignettes, little illustrations of things that I learned from him that are not necessarily in his talks or books, but things that would happen in daily interaction. And I just wanted to close with a few of them. So I'm going to read a couple of them, 3 of them. Swami downplayed organizations. Though they are necessary, they're not the definition of a spiritual community. He preferred to think of the communities he founded as a movement. This aligned them less with structure and more with spirit. Another, always be willing to channel your first principles. Always be willing to challenge your first principles. This is something Swamiji often spoke of as a way of staying flexible and being willing to turn on a dime should it become apparent that one is moving in the wrong direction. Another, I observed that Swami would often wait for years before suggesting an idea. Other times, he would never suggest the idea publicly at all if he felt we were not ready to hear it. patience is the shortest path to God. Then I had one I'm going to paraphrase. Originally, what Seattle had was an Ananda meditation group. And they would meet in people's homes, and then after a time they rented a little space. But they kept asking Swami to send a minister to Seattle so it could become a full-fledged center. And then at one point, Swami responded to their request and sent 4 ministers, 2 couples. So they had 4 times as many people to support. Not at all what they expected. But he did that to all the communities that were started. He would send a team because we are essentially communities. You know, whether you're living in the residential community or not, we're a community. And so all of the skills needed, all of the aspects needed to start community it's very rare that it's rolled up into one person. And so it would always be a team that would try to work together harmoniously to start a work. And then lastly, when we were raising the funds to build this temple, Swami came up one year and he agreed to speak at a fundraising event. We rented a hall in a very nice hotel, and it was beautifully prepared. And up against the wall, we had a very large poster made that was framed, and it was a picture of Yogananda. It was the year that it was Ananda Village's 40th anniversary, and it was Ananda Washington's 25th anniversary. And so we had 40th written on one side and 25th on the other, you know, with Yogananda. And at one point during the event, he leaned over to me, he was sitting next to me, and he said, "You know, those are not our real anniversaries. Our anniversary is when Master came to America in 1920, all of us." And I thought, yeah, of course, you know. But I think it's a good reminder for all of us that it starts and ends with Yogananda and his teachings. Swami would be horrified if he thought that we were making him special because he experienced this liberation, this moksha. Because it's there for all of us. His whole life was dedicated to say to us, we can, not only we can do this, we will do this. It's the divine promise that we will do this, each and every one of us. And so it is for these great avatars of this lineage. They're here to show us who we are. And so it started with Yogananda, it ended with Yogananda. For him, he said, if I become known for anything, my wish is to be known as a good disciple.
I am flying home in the plain of silence,